My name is Maria. I used to be the heart of our family business, until I became its ghost. The morning I discovered they had erased me felt like swallowing glass. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, scrolling through my phone like any other Tuesday, when I decided to Google myself. Call it vanity, call it curiosity. I just wanted to see what the internet thought of Maria Castellano these days. What I found was a hollow echo where my life's work should have been. Vacation photos from 3 years ago. My college graduation. Certificate. A mention in a local newspaper from when I won that art contest in high school. But nothing about Orchard Lane Designs. Nothing about the brand I had poured my soul into for 8 years. Nothing about the patterns I had sketched at my grandmother's kitchen table. The late nights I spent perfecting color palettes. The retail meetings where I convinced buyers to take a chance on our vision. I clicked through page after page, my heart hammering against my ribs. Press releases about our latest collections mentioned my brothers, Lucas and Daniel. Social media posts credited our founding team, but somehow that team had shrunk to exclude me. Even the dedication page in our grandmother's memoir, which used to read, "To my granddaughter Maria, who sees beauty in everything," now simply said, "To my family who carries on the tradition." Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Because right now, I'm sitting here with tears in my eyes, remembering how it felt to discover I had been quietly deleted from my own story. I walked downstairs to the study, where the walls were lined with awards and framed photos from trade shows. Every single one bore my brothers' names. The plaques that used to include Maria Castellano, Creative Director, now read simply, Orchard Lane Design Team. I ran my fingers along the dusty frames, searching for any trace of myself, like an archaeologist hunting for proof of a lost civilization. From the kitchen came the sound of my mother's laughter, bright and careless. She was on the phone with someone, probably one of her garden club friends, talking about how proud she was of her boys and their successful business. Each note of her joy felt like a slap across my face. The worst part wasn't even the erasure itself. It was remembering all the times they had prepared me for it without me realizing. You're not really the entrepreneur type, Maria. Your ideas are beautiful, sweetheart, but maybe a little too artistic for the market. The business side isn't really your strength. They had been conditioning me to accept my own disappearance for years. After Dad died 2 years ago, things changed quickly. Suddenly, the patterns I had created were being credited to Lucas. The color schemes I had developed were now Daniel's breakthrough innovations. The retail relationships I had nurtured were transferred to their management without a word of explanation. When I asked about it, they would exchange glances and speak to me in that patronizing tone people use with children who ask too many questions. "It's just easier this way, Maria," Lucas had said. "For legal purposes, you understand." But I hadn't understood. I had trusted them. I had believed that family meant something more than profit margins and credit lines. The contract revision came 3 months later. Pages and pages of legal language that essentially locked me out of decision-making while keeping me legally bound to the company. I signed it because they told me it was just a formality, just updating some outdated clauses. I signed it because I loved them and wanted to believe they loved me back. That was my mistake. I started carrying the weight of my invisibility everywhere. At family gatherings, when visitors would admire our products and ask about the creative process, my brothers would launch into stories about their vision and their innovative approach. I would sit there, smiling politely, dying a little, more each time. The breaking point came at our holiday party last December. My sister-in-law Jennifer was showing off our latest collection to her friends, holding up a throw pillow covered in the wildflower pattern I had designed after countless hours studying botanical illustrations in the library. "Isn't this gorgeous?" she said, running her hand over the fabric. "Lucas is so talented. He came up with this whole nature-inspired line." One of her friends nodded appreciatively. "What happened to that girl who used to be involved? Maria, I think?" She was always at these events before. Jennifer laughed, that tinkling sound that felt like breaking glass. Oh, Maria? She wasn't really the business type. She's pursuing other interests now. Other interests, as if I had simply wandered away from my life's work like a bored tourist leaving a museum. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I stared at my reflection and tried to remember who I used to be. The woman looking back at me seemed faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I had let them make me disappear so gradually that I hadn't even noticed until I was already gone. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to erase me, I would let them think they had succeeded. But I wouldn't go quietly into that good night. I would go strategically. I started spending my mornings in the dusty corners of our father's old office, going through files and documents with the methodical precision of a detective. Dad had been meticulous about record keeping, and I knew there had to be something they had overlooked in their rush to write me out of the story. The patterns were mine. I had created them, sketched them, refined them. But proving that in a court of law would be nearly impossible without documentation. What I needed was something more concrete, something legally binding that they couldn't dispute or explain away. I found it in a manila folder labeled Licensing Agreements 2017 to 2019. My hands trembled as I pulled out the thick stack of papers. These were the original contracts we had signed when we first started licensing my designs to manufacturers. And there, in black and white legal language that no amount of family politics could erase, was my name as the sole owner of the licensing rights to every single pattern in our current collection. I had signed these agreements myself, back when. My brothers still pretended to value my contributions. Back when they thought my artistic vision was cute, but ultimately unimportant to the real business of making money. They had been so eager to handle the serious aspects of the company, manufacturing, distribution, marketing, that they had never bothered to transfer the intellectual property rights. I photocopied everything, then called Carla Martinez, an indie filmmaker I had met at a conference years ago. She had reached out to me after reading one of my blog posts about the creative process, and we had stayed in loose touch ever since. More importantly, she had mentioned in passing that she was interested in stories about women in business, particularly the challenges of working in family enterprises. Maria, she said when I explained the situation, I can't believe they did this to you. But you said you still own the licensing rights? Every single one. Then you don't just have a story. You have a case. Carla agreed to document what came next, not as a scandalous exposé, but as an intimate portrait of what it means to be erased from your own life's work and what it takes to write yourself back in. I enrolled in a business law course at the community college, paying for it with money I saved by skipping coffee shops and buying textbooks secondhand. 3 nights a week, I sat in a fluorescent-lit classroom learning about intellectual property law, brand protection, and licensing agreements. My classmates were mostly returning students like me, people who had been overlooked or underestimated, and were fighting their way back to relevance. The professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, was a former corporate attorney who had left big law to teach after her own experiences with workplace discrimination. During office hours, I showed her my licensing agreements and explained my situation. This is textbook intellectual property theft, she said, adjusting her glasses as she read through the documents. They're using your designs for profit while systematically removing you from all credit and recognition. The fact that you still own the licensing rights means they're technically in breach of contract every time they use your patterns without proper attribution. She helped me draft formal notice letters, demanding audit trails and proper licensing compliance. She taught me how to file complaints with the appropriate regulatory bodies, how to document damages, and how to build a case that would stand up in court if necessary. But more than that, she helped me understand that what had happened to me was part of a larger pattern. Women, particularly women in family businesses, are often marginalized and eventually erased from the enterprises they help build. Their contributions are minimized, their roles are diminished, and eventually they are written out of the story, entirely. The thing is, Dr. Chen told me one evening as we reviewed my documentation. They probably don't even see what they did as wrong. In their minds, they were just making the business more efficient, more streamlined. They convinced themselves that your erasure was necessary for success. In the quiet hours when I couldn't sleep, I would walk through our old house, touching the walls that held so many memories. I could almost hear Dad's voice encouraging me during those late nights when I was working on my first designs. "You've got the vision, Maria," he used to say. "You see things the rest of us miss." That voice became my war song, the melody that kept me moving forward when everything else felt impossible. I missed the warmth of family dinners before everything soured, the feeling of belonging somewhere, the certainty that the people who shared my DNA would also share my victories. But I learned to transform that grief into fuel. Every dismissive comment they had ever made became evidence of their underestimation. Every time they had called my work pretty but impractical, I remembered the retail buyers who had fought to carry our line specifically because of my designs. Every family gathering where they forgot to introduce me as part of the business became proof of their guilt. I stopped attending those gatherings altogether. When they asked where I was, Mom would make excuses about me being busy with her projects, as if my fight for recognition was just another hobby they didn't need to take seriously. The legal research consumed my evenings, but it also gave me something I had lost: purpose. I was building something again, creating something that belonged to me. Not a pattern or a design this time, but a case, a story, a reckoning. Carla came by every few weeks to film, but mostly she just listened. She understood that this wasn't really about business law or licensing agreements. It was about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you decide you're expendable. "Tell me about before," she would say, setting up her small camera in Dad's old office. "Tell me about when you were still part of the story." And I would remember. The excitement of our first trade show, when buyers crowded around our booth to get a closer look at my wildflower patterns. The pride in Dad's eyes when I presented my first collection to the family. The way Lucas used to brag about his artistic sister to his friends, back when my creativity was still considered an asset rather than a liability. Those memories hurt, but they also reminded me of who I used to be before I let them convince me I was nobody. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday in March, delivered by a mail carrier who had no idea he was handing me the key to everything. I signed for the certified envelope with hands that had grown steady from months of preparation, but my heart was racing as I tore it open. Official letterhead, legal language. And then, buried in the middle of the second paragraph, the words that changed everything. Audit findings confirm that Maria Elena Castellano retains full ownership of licensing rights to all disputed design patterns, with evidence of original creation and legal registration predating current usage. I sat down hard in Dad's old chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The licensing board had completed their investigation, triggered by my formal complaints, months earlier. Every pattern they had been using, every design they had claimed as their own, every product they had sold bearing my work, all of it was documented, cataloged, and legally attributed to me. The evidence was overwhelming. Copyright registrations with my name and signature, original sketches in my handwriting, email chains where I had sent designs to manufacturers, financial records showing licensing payments that had been made directly to me even as my name was being scrubbed from public acknowledgement. They had thought they were so clever, removing me from the narrative while keeping me legally bound to the profits. But in their haste to erase me, they had forgotten the most important detail. You can't use someone's intellectual property without their permission, regardless of family relationships. I called Dr. Chen first. "Maria," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice when I read her the audit results. "You have everything you need. The question now is what you want to do with it." What I wanted was justice, not revenge, justice. There's a difference, and I had spent months learning to recognize it. I could have gone to the media immediately, screaming about theft and betrayal. I could have filed lawsuits and demanded damages. I could have burned down everything they had built using my work. Instead, I chose precision. I started with a simple blog post on my personal website, which I had neglected for months while I focused on building my case. The post was titled, "Setting the Record Straight," and it was written in the calm, factual tone Dr. Chen had taught me to use in legal documents. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I simply presented the facts. I posted photos of my original sketches next to the products currently being sold. I included excerpts from the licensing agreements showing my ownership. I shared the audit findings, with all the legal language intact. And then I waited. The response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours, my post had been shared hundreds of times. Design bloggers picked up the story. Retail industry publications ran features about intellectual property and family businesses. Social media exploded with comments from people who had experienced similar erasure in their own families and workplaces. Family brand erases the founder, but forgot who owned the rights, read the headline in Design Today magazine. The article included quotes from intellectual property experts who were shocked that such blatant misappropriation could occur within a family business. But the most powerful response came from our customers. People who had bought Orchard Lane products because they loved my wildflower patterns and my botanical designs. They started posting on social media, demanding to know why I wasn't being credited for my work. They tagged the company in angry comments. They posted photos of products with captions like, "Maria Castellano designed this. Why isn't her name on it?" The retail partners noticed. Within a week, I started getting calls from buyers who wanted to understand the situation before placing their next orders. Some of them remembered me from the early days, when I was still allowed to attend trade shows and client meetings. "Maria, is it true that you designed the entire Meadowbrook collection?" asked Janet Walsh from Henderson Home Goods, one of our biggest clients. "Because if so, we need to have a conversation about proper attribution before we can continue our partnership." I confirmed that yes, I had designed every pattern in their current inventory. And yes, I still owned the licensing rights to all of them. The dominoes started falling faster than I had expected. Lucas called me on a Thursday evening. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken directly in months. But curiosity got the better of me. "Maria." His voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk. Do we? This blog post of yours is causing problems." I almost laughed. "For who?" "You know for who. Look, maybe we made some mistakes with the attribution, but this is still a family business. We can work this out internally. Like you worked out removing my name from everything internally?" Silence. Then, "It wasn't personal." Those 3 words revealed everything I needed to know about how they saw me. Erasing someone from their life's work isn't personal. It's just business. Making someone invisible in their own family isn't personal. It's just efficient. "You're right," I said. "It wasn't personal. It was legal. And legally, you've been using my intellectual property without permission for 2 years. Maria, come on. Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, Lucas. I'm being accurate. Check your licensing agreements." He hung up. Daniel tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment on Saturday morning with coffee and pastries from the bakery. We used to go to as kids. "I brought peace offerings," he said, holding up the bag with that charming smile that used to make me forgive him for everything. I let him in, but I didn't touch the coffee. "Look," he said, settling onto my couch like he belonged there. "Maybe we handled things badly after Dad died. Maybe we should have communicated better about the changes we were making." "Maybe? Okay, definitely. We should have talked to you before we restructured the credit lines. But Maria, you have to understand, we were trying to protect the business. Your name being on everything was creating complications with investors." I stared at him. "Complications? You know what I mean. You're not really involved in the day-to-day. operations anymore. It was confusing for people. So you decided to solve the confusion by pretending I never existed. It wasn't like that. What was it like, Daniel? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like that. He sighed, running his hands through his hair. What do you want? Money? We can increase your profit sharing. We can put your name back. On some of the materials. Some of the materials? The ones where it makes sense. The creative stuff. I stood up. I want you to leave. Maria, I want you to leave. And I want you to tell Lucas that any further communication needs to go through my attorney. Your attorney? Jesus, Maria, why are you making this so complicated? I walked to the door and opened it. Because you made it legal when you decided to use my designs without my permission. Because you made it public when you erased me from everything. Because you made it personal when you convinced our mother that I wasn't really part of the business anymore. He left, but not before saying, You're going to destroy everything Dad built. No, I said to his retreating back. I'm going to save what he actually built. The part with my name on it. The legal pressure mounted quickly after that. My attorney, yes, I had hired one, a specialist in intellectual property law, who took one look at my case and agreed to represent me on contingency, sent formal cease and desist letters to all of their major retail partners. The letters were polite but clear. Orchard Lane Designs was using copyrighted patterns without proper licensing agreements. Until the attribution issue was resolved, retailers should be aware that they might be participating in copyright infringement. Most of the retailers suspended their orders pending resolution. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Without their major retail contracts, my brothers were looking at massive losses for the quarter. The business they had been so eager to protect from my complications was hemorrhaging money because of their legal complications. Mom called me, for the first time in months. Maria, sweetheart, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I think there might be some misunderstanding about this business situation. There's no misunderstanding, Mom. But surely we can work this out as a family. Lucas and Daniel are very upset. I'm sure they are. They say you're trying to destroy the company. I took a deep breath. Mom, they removed my name from everything I created. They took credit for my work. They erased me from Dad's business while keeping me legally responsible for their profits. What would you call that? Silence. Then quietly, I didn't know it. Was that bad? It was worse than bad, Mom. It was theft. What do you want them to do? I want them to tell the truth. I want proper attribution for my work. I want them to acknowledge what they did and make it right. And if they do that, you'll drop this legal thing? If they do that, we can start talking about what comes next. The public apology came 2 weeks later, posted on all of the company's social media accounts and sent as a press release to industry publications. It was written by their crisis management consultant, and it read like every corporate non-apology ever crafted. Orchard Lane Designs acknowledges that there have been attribution inconsistencies regarding the creative contributions of Maria Castellano to our product lines. We regret any confusion this may have caused, and are committed to ensuring proper recognition moving forward. It was lukewarm at best, but it was public acknowledgement. More importantly, it came with concrete actions. My name was restored to all marketing materials. The company website was updated to include a biography section that properly credited my role as founder and creative director. New product tags included my name alongside the Orchard Lane brand. But I wasn't finished. In my response, published on my blog and shared across my social media platforms, I announced the launch of the Castellano Foundation for Creative Women. The foundation would provide grants and legal support for women whose intellectual property had been stolen or undervalued, particularly in family businesses. I'm requiring Orchard Lane Designs to make a substantial donation to this foundation as part of our settlement, I wrote. Money earned from my designs will now help other women protect their creative work. The donation was significant enough to make headlines in the business press. Suddenly, The story wasn't just about one family's dysfunction. It was about systemic issues in how women's contributions are valued and protected. I also announced that I would be retaining majority ownership of all licensing rights, but that I was open to renegotiating terms that would allow the family business to continue using my designs under proper attribution and profit-sharing agreements. The renegotiation took months. My brothers had to accept that I wasn't just the artistic sister anymore. I was a business owner with legal rights that they couldn't ignore or manipulate. They had to acknowledge my contributions publicly and financially. More importantly, they had to accept oversight. The new contracts included provisions for regular audits, mandatory attribution reviews, and penalties for any future attempts to minimize my role. The first board meeting under the new structure was held in Dad's old office. I sat at the head of the table, looking at my brothers across the polished wood surface. They were subdued, professional, careful with their words in a way they had never been before. The Q3 numbers look strong, Lucas said, reviewing the reports. The Meadowbrook collection is performing especially well. Maria's Meadowbrook collection, Daniel corrected, and I could see the effort it took him to add those two words. I nodded acknowledgement, but didn't smile. This wasn't about making them grovel. It was about establishing a new normal where my contributions were recognized as essential, not optional. The real test came 6 months later, at the first gala for the Castellano Foundation. I stood on the stage of the downtown hotel ballroom, looking out at an audience of designers, entrepreneurs, lawyers, and journalists who had come to support our mission. Under a simple spotlight, I spoke in the quiet, steady voice I had learned to use in legal proceedings and board meetings. "You can remove someone's name from the credits," I said, feeling the weight of every person in that room hanging on my words. "You can erase them from press releases and social media posts. You can take their work and call it your own, but you cannot erase the story behind every stitch, every stroke, every moment of inspiration that brought that work into existence." The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. In the front row, I saw Mom wiping tears from her eyes. Not tears of pride. I had learned to distinguish between those emotions. These were tears of recognition, a moment's remembrance of who I had always been, before they convinced themselves I was nobody. After the event, she came up to me as I was gathering my things. "Maria," she said, and her voice was different somehow, smaller. "I owe you an apology. I waited. I let them make me believe that you weren't important to the business. I let them convince me that you were being dramatic, that you were making things more complicated than they needed to be." She paused, struggling with words. "I forgot that you were the one who drew those first patterns at Grandma's kitchen table. I forgot that it all started with you." "I know," I said, because I did know. She hadn't forgotten maliciously. She had just accepted the story that was easier to believe. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had celebrated my early successes, and then stood by while they were attributed to someone else. Forgiveness wasn't simple, but it wasn't impossible either. "I can try," I said. "But it's going to take time." She nodded, understanding that some damages can't be repaired with a single conversation. Lucas and Daniel were waiting by the hotel entrance when I left. They looked uncomfortable in their formal wear, like children dressed up for church. "Good speech," Lucas said awkwardly. "Thank you. The foundation is a good idea," Daniel added. "Dad would have been proud." I almost corrected him. Dad would have been proud of me, not of the foundation, but I let it pass. They were trying, in their limited way, to rebuild something that had been broken. "He would have been proud of all of us," I said instead, "if we had figured out how to work together instead of erasing each other." They didn't have an answer for that, which was answer enough. I walked to my car alone, carrying the weight of victory and loss in equal measure. I had won everything I had fought for: recognition, compensation, control over my own work. But I had also lost the naive belief that family meant unconditional loyalty, that love was enough to prevent betrayal. The woman who got into that car was not the same person who had discovered her erasure 11 months earlier. She was harder, clearer, more precisely aware of her own worth. She had learned that you can't wait for other people to remember your value. Sometimes you have to fight to make them see it. As I drove through the city streets, past the billboards and shop windows that now properly displayed my name alongside my designs, I thought about Dad and what he would make of this journey. He had always told me I had the vision to see things others missed. But I don't think even he could have envisioned this, his daughter learning to see herself clearly enough to demand that others see her too. The Orchard Lane brand continues to thrive, now with proper attribution and shared profits. The Castellano Foundation has helped dozens of women protect their intellectual property and fight for recognition of their work. My relationship with my family is complicated but functional, built on legal contracts rather than blind trust. But the most important victory was quieter, more personal. It was learning that my name wasn't something other people could give me or take away. It was mine from the beginning, woven into every pattern I created, embedded in every design that bore my vision. They deleted my name from everything, but they forgot that I owned more than just the licensing rights. I owned the story behind every creation, the persistence behind every pattern, the unbreakable thread that connected my work to my identity. And that thread, it turns out, was stronger than their scissors.